Welcome and thank you for being here. This podcast invites you to journey through conversations which share the fascination of the physical matter we inhabit, the breathing body. These conversations explore its inherent intelligence, movements, and healing. I'm talking to people from various fields of research and practice, such as osteopathy, dance, somatic practices, anatomy, embryology, spirituality, and many more. Would you like to learn about our miraculous body and be inspired in many new ways? Then this podcast is for you. My name is Flurina and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm an osteopath with a background in dance and yoga and based in London where I practice, lecture and research. I hope you enjoy these episodes and I'm looking forward to hear from you. Welcome, Delia, on the podcast, The Breathing Body. I was just thinking what a lush way to spend a Monday afternoon. It's quite rainy and windy here in London to be talking to you, an Alexander teacher. And yeah, we were just thinking how do I introduce you, which isn't that easy because in the last couple of years and decades, you've gained so many different tools that there isn't anymore just the one title to introduce you. So I just introduce you as Delia, Alexander teacher and a wonderful coach, I guess. And yeah, welcome on the podcast. I'm very grateful that you are here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel really honoured. Thank you.
And yeah, I already have written to you, and I think a wonderful actually place to start would be if you would share with us and with all the listeners a little bit about your journey, which I find so inspiring and really inspiring to when I heard and read that you actually, that whole journey with the Alexander teaching, and I think you call it your whole self-transformation journey started with a very young age when you were 14 years old and you trained with 17, which is young for an AT. So I realized, wow, movement and healing has never not been a part of your life, it seems. And would you mind to share with us
Sure,
tell us about your journey?
I'd be delighted to, yeah. So, when I was a child, I always thought I'd be an artist. I thought I'd spend a life painting pictures and things, but actually it doesn't seem to have unfolded that way. As you said, when I was 7, you didn't say this, but when I was 7, I started having knee problems. I grew too quickly and my bones and ligaments grew at different rates, and the result was a lot of knee pain. And my parents, being rather orthodox, took me off to the doctor and to the physio and to the surgeon, and I had all this medical intervention to try and help my knees, and it didn't work, made them worse. And then when I was probably around 13, 14, I was booked in for a second lot of surgery on my knees, and I just happened to see a program on television, which was, I believe, the first program that was ever made about the Alexander technique. I think it was called something like Posture and Pain, and my dad wanted to watch it, and he just said, "Will you keep me company?" So I said, "Oh, okay," and watched this, and didn't really understand it at all, but something fascinated me. So the next day, I found myself as a 13, 14-year-old phoning up trying to find an Alexander teacher, and I found one in the next village, and thought I would go and see if it would help my knees. I had no idea why, because I hadn't understood the program, but something just sort of drew me along. And I managed to find someone in the village who drove to that next village every day, who could give me a lift. I managed to get a little job for my uncle to pay for these peculiar sessions that my parents knew nothing about, and nor did I. And off I went. And the Alexander teacher then said, "You need to come 3 times a week for half an hour." And I went at 8:30 in the morning, and didn't really have a clue what was happening, but my knees felt different. They felt like they'd been oiled. And I remember kind of looking out of the window in the Alexander teacher's house and suddenly seeing all sorts of things I hadn't seen. I suddenly saw all these blossoms coming out on the trees. And it was as if somebody just opened the windows of my eyes and started showing me this other experience of life. So basically, for about 3 years, I had lessons and my knees improved a lot. And everything in my life kind of improved. But I still couldn't keep it going for myself. So when I did what was in those days O-levels at school, and everyone was saying, what are you going to do for A-levels? I was like, I'm not going to do any A-levels. I just need to do more of this Alexander stuff. I need to understand it. I need to have my knees better the whole time. So I wrote off to all these training courses, which usually 17-year-olds don't do. I must probably was 16 at the time, can't quite remember. And I got all these letters back going, no, you're too young, no. And then there was a new course starting up and they said, yeah, why not? Come along. So age 17, I packed my bags with my O-levels under my belt, left home. I went to train as an Alexander teacher. And that was really the beginning of kind of taking responsibility for myself and entering into this journey of healing and self-discovery and what I now see as kind of mastery, because I see this work very much as a way for each individual to become more masterful of themselves. And of course, back then I thought it was just all about the body, but now I know it's about so much more. And I very much see this work as being at the interface of mind, body, emotions, energetic life, and a lot more. So yeah, I went off and I trained. I did a year on one course and then moved to another really inspirational and holistic course in the Lake District and graduated when I was 20. So as far as I know, I'm one of the youngest Alexander teachers around. And at the time it was a little bit challenging being qualified and starting work and having all these grown-ups in their sort of 40s and 50s having midlife crises coming with their bad backs, and there I was at age 20 and they'd look at me as if to say, you're going to help me. But now it's quite nice because of course now I've had lots of life experience and had all my ups and downs and had kids and done all sorts of other things as well, and I've got lots of experience, and yet I'm not super old. I'm older than I was, but it's now a good place to be. So that was the beginning of my journey. Yeah.
Do you remember, Delia, what was it in that moment when you were 14, you watched that TV program? Was it, what can you remember? What was it? Was there something which really touched you? Or maybe it was because it sounded so promising, but yet you it sounds like you were a really very curious girl from always.
I'm not sure that I can even put my finger on what it was that took me there, because the program wasn't that great. I mean, I've watched it since and thought, and I know I didn't really understand it at the time. But I also, I don't think I wanted more surgery. You know, the first lot of surgery hadn't worked so well. I'd spent years going to this horrible physiotherapy department in a psychiatric hospital, and it kind of scared me, sitting in the waiting room, which was the corridor with all these mental health patients walking by. And it used to really scare me. It was very strange. So I didn't want to do more of that. And the first surgery was not great. So I think it was probably something in me saying, hang on, there's something else. Surgery and all this intervention isn't the answer. And I think my curiosity took over, and I just went, and it was the sensation, it was the feeling of, wow, something feels different. You know, my knees feel like they're oiled. How could this be if I built on this? I think it was something like that kept me going.
I love that you now said sensation, because what struck me when you told about your journey was how you described that moment when you felt suddenly your eye field open. You used the word how the Alexander tech in that moment, it showed you this other experience of life. may I invite you to talk a little bit more? What was this other experience of life? Probably that was this whole sensory world, or what world opened up for you there, which seems still to be the essence of your life?
Yeah, I think it was an excitement. When we're kids, I mean, we're brought up in the eyes of our parents doing the things our parents believe in. And I had a great childhood, playing in the fields and things, on a small holding. But there was one way, this is how life is, it's like this. And it was also quite orthodox. And then suddenly I was with someone else, the Alexander teacher, lovely woman called Claire Hughes, and she showed me this other way. I mean, she wasn't influencing me about my life and life choices, but she just had her hands in contact with my body. She enabled me to feel things. In my family, I don't think we were really taught to kind of have emotions or to feel very much. It was kind of get on and do things and have a good time. And so suddenly I was being asked to listen to myself. And one of the challenges in my childhood was I was always sensitive. I've always been told I'm super sensitive, far too sensitive, and the sensitivities become burdens often. And yet here was an arena where being sensitive was good. I was listening to myself, I was feeling things, I was allowed to soften, to release, to be in contact with myself without pushing and achieving and striving. And I hadn't been very happy, partly because of all the knee problems and other things as well. And when I started feeling these feelings in my body and kind of looking out and seeing the blossoms, I started feeling more positive and more excited and more that there was a sense there's another way and another life and life is good and maybe there's something beyond the confines that I'd been in my family life, although it was in the main good. But this sense there was something else. And that was new and exciting. Something to be curious about.
Yeah, it's really wonderful what you say, Delia, because part of me thought, let's ask her more about this other experience of life. And one part of me thought, now there is something, a complex something arising. And you mentioned something so pure and simple. And of course, it's huge. But in a way, this other experience, it was someone putting her hands onto your shoulder, back, or whatever, and actually inviting you to feel, enabling you to feel something which we have never, I think, well, I know we have never not been, we have never not felt or sensed right from the very start. It, yeah.
I think the important thing in hindsight was it gave me a sense of myself. That having someone else's hands on me gave me a sense that I existed, that I was myself in my own right, that I had a self, a sense of self, that I could have my own feet on the floor, and that someone was seeing me, not just with their eyes, but with their hands, and kind of affirming that I am here. And one of the challenges I've always had in my life is the feeling of kind of not being here, or not being very present, or kind of not existing on some other plane. And here was something telling me that, my thoughts and feelings and my existence was valid and worthy and important. And that was really powerful. So
maybe that's a good moment, Delia, for all the listeners who actually don't know yet what Alexander technique is, and you now shared how it's probably also difficult to explain in 3 sentences, but maybe you can use more than 3. Would you mind to, because it is about that, isn't it? You said it gave me a sense of myself. For all the ones who don't know what the Alexander technique is, what is it? What is it all about?
You want me to explain that? The more I do this thing called the Alexander technique, the more I realise I haven't a clue. It's such a huge territory. There are thousands of books being written, and it will tell you it's about bending at the hips and improving your posture and releasing your neck. But it's so much more than that. And for me, it's always been a way of getting out of the way of myself, letting go of the interferences that stop me being who I really am, so that I can be happy and comfortable in my body, in my mind, in my energetic self. And of course, when we're present in ourselves with our emotions, our feelings, our physicality and everything accepted, then the body works freely. So often the Alexander technique is talked about as psychophysical re-education and a way of releasing the tensions in your body and using your mind to actually do the releasing of the tensions, to bring about the releasing of the tensions so that we can use the body freely. And we talk about the spine lengthening and widening and pressure being released from joints and all sorts of kind of goodly, often posture-based, re-educative aspects of this work. But actually, for me, it's about being present. It's about being free. It's about enjoying mind, body, soul, spirit, energy, all the things that make us human. And above all, it's about, I think this sentence, leaving myself alone so I can be more of who I truly am, sums it up. And of course, there's so many disciplines that might say something similar. And this is very unique in that it's not a technique where, well, I talk for myself as a practitioner now, it's not that I do something to someone else. It's not that I give someone else exercises and they do something to themselves. It's a journey we go on together, which is about somebody finding more of who they are through letting go of what they don't need. And that's what I love. And I worked with this work now for several decades and been through many kind of cycles of learning and reinventing and discovery and deepening, working with all sorts of people from all walks of life, quite literally. Worked on many different levels, and I've been through the kind of looking at this as something for bad backs and looking at this as something that improves your posture, or looking at this as something that helps you play musical instruments or aid performance more freely. There've been so many things, working with people recovering from surgery, working with people with trauma, with bereavements, working with people who've had amputations or who are learning new skills, worked with people in offices, and you name it. I've worked with so many different people, and it all requires a different version of applying the Alexander technique. And that's what I love, that it's so versatile and can be applied to so many things. But I think where I've got to with the work, and this isn't something you asked me about yet, is that I love to use my hands to tune in and to listen to the really unique stories of any individual who comes to me. And rather than say, let's do the Alexander technique and let's impose this set of principles that are written about as the Alexander technique, rather to say, as a human being, I come and I meet you as another human being, and I will listen through my attention, my awareness, my energy body, and through my hands, and listen to what your body's actually saying. Because some people have tensions and knottings up and twistings and turnings because they've been slumped at a desk 8 hours a day for decades. But some people might have similar tensions that come from an emotional issue or from an unresolved issue from the past, or because they've been, I don't know, copying some idol of theirs, the way they stand for years, and develop certain habits. Or someone else might have had an accident or an injury or surgery, and there might be scar tissue that's contracted and twisted. There's so many ways that people become who they are and become the shape and the size and that they are and hold themselves in the way that they do. And they all, as far as I'm concerned, require a different way of unraveling. So I can work with the Alexander technique and with the same principles that Alexander teachers generally work with, but I can apply them in a myriad of different ways. And to do that, I need to first listen and meet the person and see what their body is ready for and willing for and asking for. And for me, that's where the magic of the work is.
Wow. Yeah, you say magic, and that's exactly, whilst you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, this is where the magic happens, and I also find this is the place or the moment or this is the territory which I find so fascinating to explore, and which I hugely wish to explore through this podcast also, and yet it's magical and mysterious also. It's actually difficult to put in words. You use the word process and journey, and I mean, I can share. I'm lucky enough that I was lying on your table in your studio in your home, and I think for me it actually always feels or felt like, yeah, like someone is guiding me through journeying through my own, I call them bodyscapes. And by that allowing me to access the much other levels or layers of images, might it be feelings, emotions, sensations, whatever is coming up. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into that, Delia, into how, because yeah, I think you developed a really unique way of using your hands and touch to, you said, to listen, and to, with that, to really, to facilitate change, and with change, healing in people's lives. You see, it's even difficult to, what is the right question to ask to dive deeper into what happens in this. Maybe that's a good question. Why do you feel, from your experience, is it so potent to use touch and hands to listen, to facilitate healing, and sometimes so much more or equally potent than to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways I could answer that. I tend to think more and more now,
Tell them all.
especially with the rise of technology, that we're all starved of touch. And there's so many rules and regulations now that say, we can't touch each other, or we can't touch children. Obviously, we've more recently had COVID, can't touch, can't even be close to each other. But to thrive, we need to receive sensations. We need to receive touch. We need to feel other people, other beings. And many people who will get into challenges, whether they're, mental, psychological issues or physical issues, many people can't solve those on their own or in an isolated way. They need someone else to help, as you've said, facilitate a change for the better. And some people can talk very fluently about what they need or don't need, but for many people, there's an overwhelm of confusion or anxiety or depression or pain or whatever it might be they're experiencing. And it's not so easy to get through that and begin to find what the path out of that is. And so touch is a really potent tool. I feel touch breaks down so many barriers, so long as that touch is accepting, non-judgmental, listening, has a sense of presence, as opposed to the sort of touch which is coming in to do something, to make a change. And I experienced this myself firsthand, and it created a huge change in my teaching style many years ago now. It was, I can't even think how many years, something like 25, 27 years ago, something like that. My partner died, and I was in a massive life-changing bereavement process that took many, many years, and I was in a huge state of shock and went into a kind of disembodied, numb, phased out kind of state. And at the time, I'd been doing a lot of Alexander teaching. I'd been helping train people as Alexander teachers. I'd basically been living, eating, sleeping Alexander technique. So, of course, it made sense to have some Alexander lessons, to have support through this mode that I was very familiar with. And yet what happened from that state of grief and shock and trauma was that the people who gave me Alexander lessons, who were working in a relatively, you could say, traditional style, where you put your hands on and you sort of impose a set of thoughts around freeing, releasing, doing what's called giving directions, trying to create length and openness in the body. What that did was it made everything I was experiencing 10 times worse. It disassociated me more. Afterwards, I tightened up even more, because effectively that touch that I thought would be so useful was a very particular sort of touch that was trying to get me into this more open, more released state. And in the state of shock that I was in, what I needed was someone to listen and hear the shock and help me come into myself and piece me together. So I went through this huge process over a number of years, as I say, of working through this massive bereavement. But it taught me lots and lots and lots about how I used my hands to give Alexander lessons. And it fundamentally changed my approach from one where I helped people to learn to think about their body differently to one where I first listened and met the client or the pupil, as we say. And that was the most important first step. And I learned to really refine the way I listen, pick up on tiny nuances of reactions in the body that I hadn't previously been able to, not at that level, and formulated a whole way of working with people in some degree of shock, trauma, or bereavement. And there's such an importance in touch, simply accepting touch. When you can begin to be with someone without imposing anything through the touch, the person's body that you're touching feels seen, feels heard, and begins to reveal what it needs, and begins to a large extent to unravel of its own accord, with its own pacing, its own timing. And that's what I've been working with and exploring and deepening over several decades now. And it's been interesting that I've not kind of read about what other people have done in this respect. I've never kind of gone and read lots of books about other healers, and yet there's been a huge rising in other people talking about shock and trauma and grief and the whole kind of what's he called? Gabor Mate, is it? Huge rising, lots and lots of people talking about him, and lots of the things, if I do then hear what these people are saying, I kind of think, oh, well, that's what I was discovering for myself many years ago and continue to discover. So it's been interesting to feel I'm moving at the same time as other people are making these discoveries, although I don't have kind of big PR managers kind of singing and dancing about it in public. But yeah, I think people, when they need to heal, I think touch is such an important aid to that and facilitator for that. And in the main, I find the less I do, the more I listen. The more I listen, the less I can do, the more the person will heal themselves. Their bodies will do what they need to do. The more I interfere and come in with wise words and clever strategies, the more it almost blocks the client from finding their own process of unraveling with their own timing. And of course, along the years of playing with this, I've also trained as a mental fitness coach, as an NLP coach, as a hypnotherapist. I've trained in something called The Journey, which is a Brandon Bayes-based healing method working on the principles of psychoneuroimmunology. And it's been really fascinating kind of having grown up more through the body, although Alexander technique is very much mind and body. There's a lot of physical sensations in the body, but then to train in these things that come through the mind and yet work absolutely hand in hand with Alexander work has been really interesting as well and helped me deepen the work. So those have been interesting tools.
Wow.
I've wandered a bit there.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Delia. I love when you just said the more you realize, the more I listen, the less I do, and actually the more potent or fertile ground you offer someone for changes to happen. And it's also so wonderful to hear, I think, for all of us, how you say actually all these insights and what you've learned it through your own body and through your own experience. That's one of the visions of that podcast, to help people to remember that actually it's all there. Our body is our best teacher. And it's probably, we probably find more answers by listening inside than by reading 10 books. But it's so wonderful to talk to people such as you, like you, and to see, wow, it actually does work. Because you do. You've done. You're contributing an important part.
Well,
I've
for
also
me,
been particularly. No, go on, Delia. Yeah.
I was just going to say, as a kind of add on that, for me, one of the most important things when I trained as an Alexander teacher was that my trainer said, don't do as I do, make this your own. And whatever you do, trust your intuition. Whereas a lot of training course directors wouldn't have that approach, and intuition is often kind of poo-pooed to some degree. But I would say the greatest gift any of us have, and it's certainly been my greatest gift, is intuition and the ability to follow that and enter into what I think of as the unknown zone, to work with a client through not knowing what will happen, through not knowing the outcome, not knowing what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do, and not being afraid to be in that unknowing space, because it's from that space that intuition comes, and whatever needs to happen kind of comes to fill that void, and the work unfolds on its own. And for me, I get very bored if I'm just doing what I was trained to do and kind of working in a more formulaic way, which many Alexander teachers perhaps do. The work deadens, but being in the space of knowing what I know and then letting it go and just trusting whatever needs to happen will happen. My intuition always comes up with things, and then the work's exciting and alive and kind of more meaningful. So I think intuition's a real
there. It's wonderful that you say that, but can I ask a question there, Delia? Maybe you have not had that struggle so much, but at least personally, I know for me, I would agree, yes, our greatest gift is our intuition. And from my experience, I find, wow, it needs a lot of trust, trust into myself and trust into the work. And sometimes I find it not that easy to trust that greatest gift, the intuition. I'm wondering, how did you also meet challenges on that path or on that journey, and how did you maybe overcome these moments when that unknown territory can also be scary, or when you how would you deal with challenges on that path? But maybe that came very naturally to you.
I think it was kind of thrown upon me, because when I first graduated as an Alexander teacher, I did what I'd been taught, and it was very much back in those days about lengthening and widening, looking for release. I'd learnt my set of tools and procedures and ways of working with people, and I would sort of apply them, try to be a good teacher, and they're good tools, so they basically worked. But there was an aspect of me kind of doing something, me imposing something, me trying to teach something. And when my partner died, who was a fantastic Alexander teacher, internationally known, it was such a massive shock that I literally could barely keep my feet on the ground. And what was so weird was that at the time that I was trying to come to terms, well, you can't come to terms when someone dies unexpectedly, but I was just trying to stay afloat, let's say. I really didn't want to do any Alexander teaching. It was the last thing on my mind. I had far too much to deal with and try to live through. And as sod's law would have it, people kept asking me for Alexander lessons. It's like, what? I'm in a bereavement process. I don't know who I am or where I am or what my life's about. Everything's just literally turned upside down overnight. And yet people kept asking me, could you give me an Alexander lesson? And so at some point I just thought, well, I'll just see what happens. So I started putting my hands on people, but I couldn't do what I did before. I couldn't apply any of that stuff. Everything I'd learnt was out the window because I could barely feel my body. And so I would just put my hands on people and kind of say to myself, it's enough just to be here and to meet this person with my hands. And I had to just see what happened. And if you like, I had no choice but to let my intuition work, because I I was full of brain fog. I couldn't work out whether this person needed to lengthen or widen or bend at the hips or do any of the things I'd previously done with people. So I was kind of thrown into having to trust whether I liked it or not. And that taught me such a lot. Of course, it was super scary, but everything was scary because I'd lost everything. And I just had no clue who I was. So everything was scary. So, hey, putting my hands on and not knowing what was going to happen was no scarier than anything else. And out of that, I realized how potent and powerful intuition is. Obviously, this went on for weeks, months, and years. But I realized that actually the scary place is the place where I'm trying to work out what someone else needs in order that I can help them get better. That's super stressful. I never realized it before, but the stress of trying to sort someone else out, trying to make someone better, trying to know, do they need this? Do they need that? Am I going to do this with them or that with them? That was actually really hard work. But surrendering and saying, I don't know what you need. I don't know what we're going to do. Of course, I wouldn't say that to the people coming to me.
No.
But I will be with you and I will put my hands on you and I will listen to you. Then things would come up. There was an interaction. There was a journey. I could feel people changing depending on what I said and what I fed back. I would start feeding back to people what I felt inside them, and they would be able to comment on what that meant to them. And this whole exciting thing happened that was far more powerful, far more potent, coming from this place of not knowing and surrendering, if you like, than from the place of trying to be a good Alexander teacher and sort people out. Not that it is necessarily good to sort people out, but so now I love running workshops to teach people to encourage people to be in this unknown zone and to use their intuition. It's such a rich space.
I can only say thank you for reminding myself, Delia, and for encouraging to really explore that unknown place. And it sounds, when I heard you sharing from experience, it felt like, whew, there was some also pressure, or I felt in that moment, wow, if I would allow myself to fully do that, whew, that feels like pressure is falling off my shoulder somehow. Letting go of that, I know what you need and I need to fix you. And it's interesting because in the beginning you mentioned how that whole process of actually going to the Alexander teacher when you were a teenager, how you start to take responsibility for yourself. And now I think, wow, maybe it was that a moment from what I witnessed and hear you saying, you actually also gave responsibility back to your pupils. I think as practitioners, very often we take so much responsibility. Yeah, the responsibility, you said it, I need to know what is wrong, I need to fix you. But yeah, it's really powerful and potent to also say, taking responsibility for myself means I give the responsibility also back to you. And then there is a lot of trust, the trust into the inherent intelligence, into the process, which is there, even if I'm not trying to fix you.
Yeah.
And the trust into the work.
Yeah, it's so important because every individual has their path, if you like. Every individual has their pacing for healing, their pacing for understanding change and healing. They have their different capacity to cope with change. I mean, releasing is wonderful, can be super comfortable, but it can also be very challenging and uncomfortable. And as a teacher, as a practitioner, to kind of take someone more quickly than they're able is not a great thing. Can rubber band back. To work from a place of ego and give someone this fantastic experience, but take it too far. So again, it rubber bands back and they tighten or end up in a less good state is not great. But to be humble enough to step back and really allow that other person to unfold with their own timing at the pace that their cells can cope with, that their cells aren't being pushed more quickly than they need, that their energy body is able to cope with those changes, that psychologically and emotionally they're able to integrate. Nothing's being forced or pushed or imposed upon. It's incredibly important. But it's so easy to think, oh yeah, I'll be that great practitioner, I'll give you this great experience, and it's all about me instead of all about them. And so wonderful to step back and kind of be a catalyst for change and a witness to their change, and just work with the individual as long as they wish to, and be part of that journey. Quite an honour and quite magical.
Yeah, you used wonderful words. It's also about, what is a humbleness and respect. Respect for the pupils or patients, clients' journey. Wow, I see we could talk for hours, but the other thing which you already kind of mentioned it, and I know that you love that topic and I love that topic too, and I want this podcast also be about it, but actually with you I break the ice, and for the first time I talk with someone about embryology, which for many listeners might also be a complete new thing, never heard about it. And I think a kind of bridge arose in the moment when you said, to thrive, we need touch. And in that moment you said, to thrive, we need touch. I saw the embryo, the growing baby in the womb, and how the sense of touch is, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my knowledge, is the first sense we actually have before we see or hear or smell. We sense, we perceive, we develop the sense of touch. And I know, because I've experienced it through and with you, that's embryology. What is embryology? That's another big topic. The science, the story of how we came to be, maybe the story. It's a very poetic topic. That embryology is hugely important in your work and is a big influence, inspiration. And I would love to ask you, why? What does it mean to you, or what did you find in the work of embryology?
Again, it comes back to the magic, the kind of original magic of being human. Because embryology, of course, is looking at the development in the womb, especially in that first 8 weeks. And yet, ordinarily, when you study embryology, you're coming from the viewpoint of what could go wrong. What are all the interruptions to growth and development? But it can also be looked at in a magical, life-enhancing way to understand and to see how did we grow? How do our individual structures and tissues grow? And when we do look from that viewpoint, we see that each organ, each tissue, each structure has a particular dance that it goes on. As cells multiply and tissues become actual sort of cells, become structures, they grow in a particular direction with a particular emphasis. They go on a particular journey, starting from this mass of cells and ending up being individual cells that form this or form that or whatever. And looking at that pattern of growth is absolutely miraculous, because of course the body from that point of conception does this development thing. It does all these dances of its own accord. There's no kind of person reading out a manual going, okay, cell, you go over there and you go there and you become a liver and you become a heart. Somehow there's these magic messages that inform our cells. There's an energy, there's an intelligence that creates our development. And I became really inspired about this, very simply because my partner, who died, Don Burton, he was called, amazing Alexander teacher, also felt it was important to teach embryology on the training course that actually he ran. And one day I was in probably one of the first embryology lectures that he gave, and he talked about the development of the heart and the diaphragm. And he likened it to a fried egg that begins on your head and does a somersault and ends up inside of your body. And I thought, what? What's this about fried eggs and somersaults? And something really intrigued me. So of course, I went to a few of his lectures, but then I decided to study this myself. Not formally, just in my own way, looking at books, drawing pictures, trying to understand certainly the development of the locomotor system and some other bits and pieces, the nervous system and some of the organs. And what I was so fascinated by was, in conjunction with my Alexander training, that if we look at the patterns of embryological development, the patterns and directions of growth all underpin what Alexander said. So in the Alexander technique, we're looking at how to enable the head to release off the top of the spine. We're looking at releasing the spine so it becomes longer as the head releases off the top of it. We're looking at releasing out across the top of the arms whilst connecting the arms into the spine. We're looking at releasing the legs out and away whilst also connecting them in. We're looking at allowing breathing to happen so the diaphragm can freely contract down and release up of its own accord with the out breath. And there's many ways in which we think about ourselves with a direction in order to bring about a release. At least there is in traditional Alexander teaching. So we're bringing the mind into the body, thinking about releasing the head up off the top of the spine, or releasing the spine into length and these sorts of things. And this mirrors all of the directions that we originally grew in from roughly 2.5 to 3 weeks old in the womb, when we were the size of a pinhead or smaller. We started growing and developing in this very expansive, organised, opening way, everything being organised around the initial growth of the spine. But when we look at development outside of the womb, as soon as we're born, and certainly by the time we're a child going on a teenager, we've had enough, sadly, usually stress and pressure in life that already we're beginning to form our own individual unique contractions and twists and pull downs and holding ourselves together and coping. And all of those twists and coping strategies go against the expansive and well-organised pattern of growth that we find in the embryo and that we're trying to evoke with the Alexander technique. So we have a kind of pulling down of the head into the neck and spine, a contracting of the spine, a pulling up and in of the shoulders, a pulling down in the front of the body, a sucking in of the legs, a holding of the breath, and so on and so forth. So one of the ways that I like to think about the Alexander work that I do for myself and with others is to think that we're removing the interferences, those layers of twisting and contraction, so that the body can do what it knows best how to do, so it can get back in contact with those original embryological patterns of growth. For instance, one of the first things that grows in the embryo is the spine, and it grows from what is the bottom end of ourselves, the tail end, up towards the head end, and then blossoms into a head. So we have this original upward growth. And it's only when that has happened and matured that then other tissues can begin to form to create the body wall and the arms and legs and everything else. So I like to think, rather than having to learn something new and strive to release and open and organise the body Alexander-wise, what we're actually doing is just allowing the body, getting out of the way of ourselves, to allow the body to do what it's done since it was a tiny cluster of cells. And if I can leave myself alone and allow all that embryonic organisation to happen, it's just, for me, more potent, more vibrant, easier, less complicated. And so I like to tell embryological stories and then work with visualizations around those stories applied into the body, so that the body becomes the kind of embryological original self, revisiting those patterns of movement. as a visualization, and it's incredibly powerful, and again brings a new life or a new essence to the Alexander work.
Thank you for sharing, Delia. Yeah, at this very moment, I would like to actually say to all the listeners, for everyone who thinks, wow, that is a topic which really fascinates me, but it can be, I mean, it is overwhelming if you just open any embryology book. I've opened many embryology books, Delia, and I've listened to many people talking about embryology, and no, never did I met no one else other than you who managed in such a, I actually can't put it in words, in such a clear and yet poetic and moving way to explain to me in a way that I actually can relate to it in the body and movement, the body I have now and the movements I do now. I've never met someone who helped me to literally experience the embryological journey I went through over and over again. And yeah, I can just point all the people in your direction.
Thank you.
You did a series of workshops, and it will be continuously involved in your work. And I think you are, for everyone who wants to learn more about that, go to Delia. You found a wonderful way to teach that. And what I particularly loved about what you just said now is that's wonderful. Yeah, rather than learning new things, to actually allowing the body to do what it always did and what it knows best. In biodynamic osteopathy, we talk about how the forces which created us are the forces which heal us. And that's the place. It's all there. It has never not been there.
Yeah. And that's such a wonderful thing to work with, because we really don't have to learn new things. We're just trusting what's inherently there. I recently did, just finished actually, I ran a year-long program in embryology for Alexander teachers and body workers, and it's available for anyone to do online. I think there's about 36 weeks of material working through embryological
I'll put that into the show notes, Delia.
Yeah, and I think the course you came on was we did a workshop a month for 8 months, or longer workshop. So there are, if people are interested, there's apart from live workshops that I run in person or sometimes online, there are 2 arenas to work with embryology in a kind of body health enhancing way via recordings online.
I'm aware of time, and now I think, wow, actually maybe I think we draw a wonderful circle, and what you just said before, how and it is that's so also pressure taking. We don't have to learn anything new. We just have to remember to what we actually are best in doing. And yeah, this podcast is called The Breathing Body, and I think maybe intuitively my intuition now thinks, wow, we almost arrive at the breath, which also we have never not been breathing. The breath has been a gesture in utero. When we were in fetus embryo in the womb, we were breathing in amniotic fluid, and our body, because what I also, another big topic to explore with you would have been also, what role does the breath play in your work, and what does the breathing body mean to you? And maybe we can just bring it around the circle with, what do you think the breath? We've never not been a breathing body. Would you agree?
Yeah, gosh, it's such a huge topic again, the breath. I mean, the breath is the first thing that gets interfered with. So the minute there's stress or upset of any sort, it's reflected in the breath. And the sign of freedom and contentment in oneself is that there's a free flow of breath coming in and out without being held, without being limited, without being restricted. And that, of course, the rib cage is moving, the diaphragm's moving. It's all very fluid, rather than the shoulders having to heave on the rib cage to heave the breath in. So in many ways, I mean, Alexander was nicknamed the breathing man, because in so many ways, when you start learning to leave yourself alone, or to release the unnecessary habitual tensions, the first thing that changes is the breath. There's the in-breath. As we release, there's a freeing of the ribs. There's a freeing of the spine. It's such an essential part of being alive. And of course, there's so many breathing exercises you can learn. But I think the message from an Alexander viewpoint is not to work on breathing techniques and breathing exercises and breathing procedures and controlling how you breathe. But the message is really that if you leave yourself alone, you'll begin to release. And as you begin to release, the breath will come in and out more freely. And the more you learn to leave yourself alone, the more free your breath will be. And then we can express ourselves more freely. So one of the other big pieces of my work is with singing and breathing and using the voice. And that's a whole other kind of accompanying topic. But I love to both feel in myself and to feel in other people that sense that they're dropping into their bodies and into their breathing capacity, and that instead of breathing in, becoming this heaving up, that actually the act of taking a breath becomes a reflection of the embryological journey, which is that the diaphragm travels down and the air comes in and down and comes all the way to the bottom tips of the lungs, which are in the back, not in the belly. So we don't get involved with belly breathing, but actually this filling of the bottom of the lungs and the sides of the ribs, that coming down and in with the breath, which happens so organically when we're leaving ourselves alone, brings a real grounding and a real sense of strength and sense of self. Whereas all this kind of heaving up or shallow breathing or pulling the body up to breathe does quite the opposite. It's very disconnecting. But as you say, it's a whole other topic.
Yeah, I feel that is on that breath of you. That's you've rounded it up most beautifully, and on that breath of leaving ourselves alone, I would like to say, with the hope for maybe part 2 at one point where we can continue the conversation, I just would like to say a huge thank you, Delia, for sharing your experiences and part of your journey with us. It's touched and inspired me, and I know if it does that to me, it will do that most likely to many other listeners as well. I'm left to say thank you for sharing with me and all of us.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk with you and to have the opportunity to